Hello and welcome to another episode of People on the Move. I'm Weston Labar with Cargomatic. With us again today, one of our favorite guests, Mr. John Gold, Vice President of Supply Chain and Customs Policy at the National Retail Federation. John, it's been a wild time since you've last been here, and you guys just unveiled your most recent forecast. Let's tell the folks what's going on in the world of the retailers.
Thanks, Weston. Good to see you, and always appreciate the opportunity to do the podcast. So I think we've got two different forecasts that we've put out. We recently held our state of retail and the consumer a couple of weeks ago, where we did our forecast for the retail industry for the year, where we're looking at retail sales, and we're right now looking at retail sales increasing between 2.5% and 3% for the year. Which is good because it's right in line with kind of where we've been, for the past 10 years. Obviously, still a lot of uncertainty and headwinds in the economy, but, we're still looking at, positive sales and, again, positive growth as we've seen, over the last decade or so. But then we also put out our global report tracker, where we actually upped our first half forecast. I think originally we had about an 8% bump in imports into the key ports that we follow, and we've increased that now to just over 11%, I believe. And we're looking at imports for next month to hit the 2 million TEU mark, which is the highest they've been, at least for this year, since the fall of last year. So, we're continuing to see the trend of imports on the rise, as we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and it's interesting because obviously this year we've seen early reports of, from the Port of Los Angeles, Long Beach, record years, other than obviously the year that the pandemic shattered every watermark for the amount of cargo coming through these gateways. But you're seeing this not just here, but you're seeing some ports either report record months or near record months, I should say, and or projecting very strong and solid months. These are obviously would have been record if you take out the pandemic for many of the seaports. At the same time, we're seeing different reports from certain shippers about inventory levels and depletion of inventory. It sounds like it's a little bit of a mixed bag, would you say, amongst different retailers? Certain retailers with certain products are really in the replenishment mode and gearing up for strong consumer activity. Others, depending on what they have, it may be a little bit slower, but still, it looks like thinking they're going to have really strong years from a commercial perspective.
No, Wes, that's absolutely true. I think it really depends upon the retailer and what segment they're in. I think each segment is a little bit different, but I think, inventory levels are, back to around they were pre-pandemic. Obviously, during the pandemic, we had a lot of excess inventory because everybody was buying everything. Folks had to just stock up. And folks, kind of over planned and prepared because that consumer demand was so high for so many different goods. Once things started to tail off as the economy opened up once again and consumers started, shifting around and were spending more on services than goods or shifting how they were buying goods, we had that excess inventory for quite a while, but things certainly have leveled out. And it's dependent upon the retailer and, again, their segment and kind of where they are with inventory. But I think, again, right now, we're just planning towards a positive second half of the year, half of the year push. Obviously, a lot of folks now have already geared up for the summertime and getting ready for those summer key issues there. So it's again, we're looking at a positive year, and each retailer is taking a little bit different as far as how they're approaching their strategy.
Yeah, and you can't talk about retail consumption anymore without e-commerce. Obviously, e-commerce was trending upward before the pandemic, and then, as I like to joke, even my grandparents had to learn how to buy things online and or call their grandson and have him buy things online and have them delivered to their house during the pandemic. E-commerce seems to have cooled off a little bit from the pandemic highs when you were forced to do online shopping, but it's still really strong comparatively to pre-pandemic. What are you hearing from your members vis-a-vis the e-commerce channels? Because obviously when you talk about inventories, you talk about replenishment, you talk about just the needs of both the supply and the distribution chain. E-commerce is one of those very interesting tactics for consumption because you don't get all the same demand planning you would if you're putting it in a brick and mortar store. So what are you hearing from from your members vis-a-vis e-commerce, the role it plays moving forward. Obviously, it's going to continue to grow, but how they're planning around that, because I think it's a bigger variable than it's ever been.
No, absolutely. I mean, as you noted, during the pandemic when everything shut down, I mean, that really was your only option for a lot of different stores. So you saw that significant spike in e-commerce sales, and that was critical for retailers, especially for those that were not deemed as essential, and had to close their doors to the physical interaction. So e-commerce kind of exploded at the start of the pandemic, but again, once things started to reopen, you saw the e-commerce, drop back down to kind of where it had always been, around 20% of, total retail sales. But e-commerce is an important part of any retailer's strategy. It's the multi-channel strategy that they have. And as you've noted, retailers are looking at all different forms of distribution now. Buy online, pick up in store was not a big thing pre-pandemic. But now buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, that certainly exploded as retailers put a lot of investment into those options during the pandemic, and it continues today. So retailers are looking more and more at their stores as distribution centers and fulfillment centers. Again, trying to meet the consumer where they are. So as you got folks looking at our delivery of products bought online, you're fulfilling that from the store itself. So I think a lot of retailers are rethinking their fulfillment strategies and how e-commerce and the store itself play a role in that and work together as a part of that.
Yeah. Any major call outs from your perspective, looking at the forecast that maybe, obviously the update, that's great news because it was a revision upward. It shows, again, just strong consumer behavior and an outlook that'll be really good for the transportation and distribution network. Because obviously, if you bought it, a trucker brought it, as they like to say, or as I like to say. But are there any call outs that you thought were interesting beyond just the revision upward? Because you guys do, I think, the best job. Obviously you have the right membership to be able to get the most accurate reporting, but you guys do such a great job calling out details that others don't even think about looking at. So anything for the listeners and the viewers that you think we should pay attention to as we continue to go through this year?
Well, I mean, I think that the big thing is the fact that despite the headwinds we're facing, not just with the economy, but the disruptions we continue to see in the supply chain, cargo continues to move. Cargo will always find a way, which I think is really important. So as we continue to see issues in the Middle East with the attacks in the Suez, the ongoing challenges with the Panama Canal because of the water levels, and the incident we saw in Baltimore, now with that port being essentially shut down to vessel traffic, I applaud the work they've done in Baltimore. The fact that now they're looking at the port being fully operational again at the end of May. But with that, the retailers I represent, as well as other shippers and their supply chain partners, have all worked together to ensure cargo continues to move and gets to where it needs to be. It might take a little longer, but there are ways to figure it out. So I think it's important to note that despite the challenges we face, this industry is extremely resilient and continues to be and will continue to be, because we all know something's on the horizon. There's always some kind of disruption that impacts the industry. There are things that we can plan for. We've got the labor negotiations on the East Coast and Gulf Coast that might cause some disruptions that people are starting to plan for now. But again, there are other things that you can't plan for. I mean, nobody expected a vessel to hit a bridge and take out a port. So,
Yeah, that's a new one for me too, John. Yeah, I was waiting for some. I've been through shipping line bankruptcies, labor negotiations, pandemic. I mean, we've been through all these things, right? And you can't make this stuff up. I did not have on my bingo card bridge collapse, but
I mean, we had vessels stuck in the Suez, but but nobody had bridge collapse. So it's, again, how do you prepare and making sure you've got the right relationships with your suppliers, whether it's your product suppliers or your service suppliers, to make sure everybody can respond appropriately and respond quickly to make sure there's minimal disruption in the supply chain.
Yeah, and speaking of disruption and resiliency, I think that's a great segue, because as we've talked about, we've seen near record numbers in places like Southern California. You've seen a reemergence of a lot of the different vessel strings to the PNW with Tacoma and Seattle. You're still seeing very strong numbers on the East and Gulf Coast as people, I think, prepare for potential, but hopefully not labor disruption amongst other things. And then you've also had just unique situations like the bunching of cargo because of having to pivot the Suez Canal issue and other things. But what we're not hearing about is massive port congestion. And, I was asked recently by the media in an interview, whether or not the ports were going to see big bottlenecks. And I said, the irony from my perspective is that you're not hearing that. In fact, any of the real issues we see now are not volume related. They're issues we have all the time. Appointment availability, not having return locations. Sometimes the lack of volume makes those situations worse than too much volume. But are you hearing anything from your members? Because I think that the pandemic challenged us. The industry, responded with investments in infrastructure and equipment, a lot of different things that made it kind of work as best it could. But coming out of it, this all, record volumes aside, seems like a walk in the park as opposed to what we were dealing with during the pandemic. So are you hearing any issues from your membership where they're saying, man, this like really concerned about the port congestion? Or are they kind of feeling like, okay, this is going to be as close to a business as usual year, as long as there's no more bridge collapses, labor negotiation issues, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's back to the business as usual. And as you noted, the ongoing issues we continue to have, which is operations of the ports in general. I mean, things that you and I have been working on, better part of a decade on some of these gate related issues and appointment availability and all those kinds of just normal issues that we still think need to be addressed. As we're looking at how do we build ports for the future, we've got to address just some of these basic operational issues of appointment availability, return locations, equipment availability. I mean, one issue we did hear about is with the rails. There was rail dwell had increased at LA and Long Beach, to double what it was.
Got
I
over
think they're
6.5 days and
yeah,
north between 3 and 4 days,
right.
right? So
So I think they're clearing through that, and part of the issue has just been again availability of equipment. Are the rail cars getting back to where they need to be, and how are you matching the need for the import and export cargo to do that? So again, these are just basic blocking and tackling issues. I think that we just need to continue to work through. I think one of the positives coming out of the pandemic that I hope we're going to see more of is the data availability and better discussion between partners to understand kind of what's coming in and how do you better plan and forecast. And look, we all know forecasting is extremely difficult. Even in good times, it's tough to figure that out. But whether it's the flow initiative that a lot of folks are participating in with DOT, or what the FMC is looking at for their initiative, but just again, just better visibility into the system to understand what's coming. And one of the things that we've been pushing for, knowing that we've got potential issues on East Coast and Gulf Coast, is are the West Coast prepared for what we think is going to be a surge as folks look to make that shift? And are they preparing now to make sure they've got the equipment and availability and everything else ready to go once those numbers continue to increase? They're seeing those increases now. How it's going to be in a couple of months, unclear, but we've got to start having those conversations now and figure out how much of a shift is going to happen, what's the surge going to look like, and are we fully prepared to handle those issues?
yeah, I can tell you from the trucker's perspective, everything I hear is we're ready for the cargo, bring it. And I feel like even despite all the reports about, again, volume levels being high, you don't hear from the truckers that they don't have any capacity, right? I think every
Right.
trucker's out there going, I'll take your business. Like, what do you have available? Which shows, again, just the response from the market as to, hey, we've got this robust level of capabilities that we've never had before. Now is the time to utilize them effectively. And as you know, for the West Coast ports, it's been an ongoing saga of lose your freight to the East Coast. Some of it stays, a lot of it comes back, but then every time there's an opportunity to show that we're ready for prime time, there's false starts galore, right? There's the inability to move the cargo. This time, when they really need a win, it looks like they're going to actually get one. And I also think, talking about a lot of the ongoing issues and things we've been working on, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act obviously was a hallmark piece of legislation that was passed. Congress rarely looks at our industry in the way that we want them to, and obviously getting them to take up OSRA and getting them to move it forward was a huge win in and of itself for a large majority of the supply chain that, quite frankly, didn't feel like they were being heard. And the majority of them are here, right, in the US, truckers and shippers alike. And I just want to say, like, thank you to Congress for taking that up and for jumping into the supply chain issues, because we've all been saying it's one of the most critical industries you're going to view, because much like the financial sector, these two sectors, everybody relies on it. You need a financial sector to be strong so you can, pay for your goods and whatnot. But then you need the supply chain to be strong so goods and services and capabilities are getting to and from where they need to. Um, there's been a lot of leadership from the Federal Maritime Commission, and again, I just want to say thank you to them, because Chairman Dan Maffei has taken on a different approach from the FMC and saying we actually have a place and we're going to regulate, we're going to take a look at these issues. And the leadership of Commissioner Dye on D&D and Commissioner Bensel on data, as you brought up, Commissioner Vekich's industry expertise, and even Commissioner Sola, who's more on the cruise side, but his willingness to come and learn and meet with the industry. They've taken an all hands approach on this. And some of the rulings that come out, I think, are probably more favorable for the trucker than for your members, because I know, being at the Harbor Trucking Association meetings and whatnot, there's some truckers that are like, well, I've only got X amount of days left to have to process these per diem invoices, and then John Gold's members are going to have to deal with it, but I'll help them because they're our good customers. Talk about, long-winded way of saying, talk about some of the more recent developments of OSRA. How are your members responding to it? Because I think that was maybe one of the few things that the truckers and the BCOs were not lockstep on, but both parties still look at it as we need to work together to make this whole situation better. It really didn't matter who the bill was necessarily going to. Both parties were going to have to be working together to solve some of these issues around unreasonable charges. But how are your members taking it? What's left to be done to make sure that equitable actions are and pathways for enforcement are going to be present in this process? Where are your members lining up on the detention to merge billing rules, and then just OSRA as it's currently constructed, and where do we need to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the fact that Congress, overwhelmingly passed the bill. I mean, the House passed it 4 times, Senate, 1 time. That never happens. I think every time it passed the House, it actually picked up, a couple of members as well. So you had, near majority at the end of the day who supported the bill. But I think it's an important piece of legislation because, again, it changes a little bit of the focus of the FMC to really look at the importer exporter and provide more support for them with some of the challenges they've been facing over the years in the industry. I mean, look, a bulk of what was included in OSRA came out of the complaint or the petition that we had filed with the FMC back in 2016 on detention demurrage. While the rule that came out focused solely on billing practices, I think there still needs to be an examination and further clarification on just D&D practices in general. When D&D can and should be applied. That was a big part of what we had put forward in the petition, because we saw a lot of times where there are issues that are beyond the control of the BCO or the trucker that result in cargo being delayed but yet being charged. So again, looking at kind of the fairness and reasonableness issue, we've got to come up with a better situation on how D&D is applied. I think, look, if we're responsible, yeah, willing to pay. If it's a trucker who's responsible, then there's got to be some communication there as well. But there are plenty of instances where we've got congestion issues at the port that are beyond the control of the BCO or the trucker, where we can't get the cargo or return the equipment, as we saw during the pandemic. But yet, billions of dollars in D&D were charged and collected. So I think we still need to take a look at that whole process. The billing practices rule doesn't take effect until next month, but I think it's going to lead to more discussion among the BCO and their trucker on some of these issues to ensure there's responsibility when it comes to that. Because again, for the shipper, the BCO who's not there at the port and doesn't know when issues arise, they've got to have that insight and visibility into that because they're the ones that have to pay quickly, pay that charge. So, I think that's going to be a big part of what I think my members are looking at is, again, those relationships and getting an understanding of how that whole system is going to work now going forwards. Will we need the FMC to take a look? Who knows? We'll see how this all kind of shakes out. I think the one area that, still needs to be addressed is, rail storage charges on intermodal moves, where it kind of falls into that gray area between the FMC and the STB over who actually has authority over those fees. I know the FMC certainly would like to have that under the Shipping Act, where they correctly think it belongs. We were hopeful we get some legislation introduced in Congress that would help address that. That seems to be kind of stalled out right now, but we think there needs better clarity there as well, because again, it's a fairness issue. Who's responsible and who do we go to challenge the fees is the bigger question.
I was going to say you've got two different games being played at the same facility at the same time, right? You've got the international side of it, where if it's on an international through bill of lading, then it's FMC jurisdiction based on the most recent interpretations of things. I have to throw that out there. But if it's not, if it's domestic intermodal, or it's not on some sort of international through bill of lading, then it falls under a completely different set of rules, different regulator, et cetera. And yeah, it can become quite confusing because, as you know, as the customs professional for the NRF, a lot of these documents are just that. It's how you put the paperwork together to have the most advantageous way of moving your cargo on that bill of lading, whether that's financially or whether that's regulatorily. You're looking at the best way to protect your company. And now all of a sudden you've got this new variable, which is, okay, well, under one bill of lading, I'm protected under OSRA and the Federal Maritime Commission. I can go through that charge complaint process, et cetera. And on the other side, I have no idea what the rules are.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. So I think, again, there is where we're looking for that clarification and getting an understanding of, who do I go to challenge some of these charges that may or may not be accurate.
Yeah. So, and I couldn't agree more. I think there's more to come on this. I think the charge complaint process, although no one ever wants to go through a complaint process, is going to become very prevalent. What I know, I'm listening to folks and what I'm looking for, because again, you've got truckers who are doing a lot of this administrative work, fighting these bills now. It remains to be seen how different shippers, I know you've got a bunch of different members. I'm sure they're all looking at different strategies and best practices are yet to be defined. Some may take it in-house. Some may hire third parties to administrate this. Others may put it as part of their service contract with their trucker, right, as to what needs to happen vis-a-vis detention demurrage billing. And yet you've also got ocean carriers that are, I should say, equipment providers in general that are creating their own criteria as to what paperwork they will accept. And that, to me, can be undermining, depending on what those restrictions are, to what the intent of OSRA and the D&D billing rules are. Because obviously it's about creating fairness and equity and having literally a reasonable process. That is the word we've used since day one. And if you have criteria that says you can't use this third-party vendor, or you can't use AI, or you can't use a certain technology, then you're not really trying to make it easier, right? You're trying to figure out a new way to make it difficult to dispute these processes. And for a shipper who's never done it before, if you're a major retailer, you may have the resources to create something that may even be better than what your trucker was doing before. But for most of them, they're smaller, medium-sized mom and pop type businesses. They don't have the wherewithal to hire a group of experts to do this stuff, and having a clear process of what is acceptable ubiquitously, not by steamship line, is going to be important. And I believe that may be the next shoe to drop from an FMC perspective is, hey, you can't all have your own processes. You need to broadly accept these type of documents and criteria in this dispute charge process. But we probably need some sort of a legal effort or some sort of an official complaint before that happens. But I think that's something your members will want to look out for as well, because you don't want to learn how your trucker was doing it effectively to find out that the rules have changed yet again as to what they can and can't do.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the areas too we got to focus in on are the resources available to the FMC. I mean, look, they've got a lot of new responsibilities under the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. And I guess the question is, do they have the right staff and budget to handle that? I think, the charge complaints, they're going to see more and more coming through. So again, do they have the right number of staff to help address that? I think that's something we're going to have to take a close look at and work with the commission on to see if we need to get them additional appropriations and funding to address these issues.
I couldn't agree more. And then obviously, it's the last thing that everybody I think is looking at is um, the UIIA, right? Uniform Intermodal Interchange Agreement, and other type of documents like that now will have to be updated to comply with the new law. I think everybody's watching at those as well, because those master service agreements carry a lot of weight, but your members, the last time I checked, are not members of the UIIA or signatories to the UIIA.
Nope.
And that is a document that 100% governs commercial terms around per diem/detention. And now that the bills are going to go to the shipper, that's got to be a wholesale change on anything on the maritime side. Again, we'll put the rail to the side because who knows how that progresses. But I know the answer to this question without even asking it. But have there been conversations with your members about wanting to get engaged and sign on to the UIIA?
Not at all. Hasn't even come up in conversation yet.
Yeah, had to ask.
But I mean that's right. But I think that's something where the truckers need to start having those conversations with their clients, with their BCO clients, and start talking about, here are some of the issues that come up. And I guess then the conversations be had under UIIA of, how do we address this?
Mm-hmm.
And again, how do we update this to reflect what's in current law and make sure that it's all squared away?
Absolutely. Well, needless to say, it has been an eventful several years, and in different roles now, I've obviously enjoyed working together. I feel like, accomplished a lot, and it's not just the two of us, right? I mean, you're talking about literally hundreds of associations who've been involved in this, and then
Mm-hmm.
tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of individual businesses who've been involved in this entire process, and yet there's still work left to be done. What else are you guys looking at the NRF? I mean, I follow you guys pretty religiously through social media. I know you're doing a lot on cybersecurity, on physical security. There's just so many different things that you guys are looking at. Obviously, for storefront retailers, you've got all the smash and grab related legislation in the different states, probably a lot of it in the state that I currently am sitting in. But what are some other things for the listeners that they should be paying attention to, just as general consumers that are supporting the retail industry? Because you, like other elements of the supply chain, you have no shortage of things outside of the physical supply chain issues that you're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are a ton of issues that we're working on, on a daily basis. I mean, for me personally, it's not just the supply chain and transportation issues, but it's where we're going on, trade policy, which is a big part of the supply chain. Do we have a positive pro-growth trade agenda, where we're actually looking at opening, foreign markets for U.S. exports and helping, lower the cost for U.S. imports? Unfortunately, we haven't really seen that out of this administration. They have maintained the China 301 tariffs, which we continue to say continues to have an impact on companies and consumers, both for finished goods as well as inputs to production for U.S. manufacturers. Where else are we going on trade? I mean, they've got a new potential trade case looking at, Chinese shipbuilding, and we're going to start looking at leveling tariffs or fees on Chinese built ships, which is going to have a huge impact on the industry. Lots of different things on the trade front. Obviously, privacy is a huge issue for the retail industry, AI, and kind of where we're going with artificial intelligence and how that's being used. Labor continues to be a top priority, and all the things that impact labor and tax. And then, as you noted, the ongoing issues of organized retail crime, spending a lot of time on those issues as well. And the ORC issues are more than just the smash and grabs that you see. It's more than just shoplifting. It is credit card fraud. It's cargo theft. It's all these different aspects of crime where the products are being resold probably to, unknowing consumers that it's, stolen merchandise. And then those profits are being used to fund other more illicit activity, whether it's drugs, guns, human smuggling, or going back to folks overseas. So it's a huge issue that we've got a big priority on, and we are trying to get some legislation passed that would help set up a formal coordination center at the federal level that could then help the state and locals as they're going after and prosecuting these criminal organizations. So that's a big priority for us. As you know, to California, it's been a huge issue in California. They have started putting more money and initiatives towards addressing the issue. And, a big shout out to our partner in California, Rachel Michelin at the California Retail Association, and the great job that she's been doing there on not only just bringing attention to the issue, but actually getting the California legislature and the governor to help try and address the issue. But more needs to be done.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of watching all the documentaries on the organized crime and the history of it in the U.S. And RICO was created for an interesting purpose, right? Which is to get at the heart of these organized efforts that, to your point, then fund all of these other illicit activities. And so it feels like maybe this is the current version of organized crime. It's just it's taking a different shape and form, right? It's not guys in trench coats with hats that are 7 feet tall and 300 pounds walking into your store. It's somebody that's not even going to walk into your store and somehow is going to figure out ways to defraud you of potentially millions of dollars over a period of time.
Well, and the bigger challenge, it's not just the theft of the product, but over the past few years, we've witnessed more violence tied to these crimes as well. So it's the violence against the store associate and the consumer, which makes it challenging. So, I mean, the fact that you've got some of these groups coming in with bear mace. I mean, who comes into a store with a bear mace? They're setting fires to cause a distraction. And unfortunately, we've had a couple of associates who have been killed during some of these episodes. So it's a huge challenge that we're trying to address.
Yeah, it's hopefully something we address quickly, because unfortunately you're seeing brick and mortar retail operations cease to exist in some of America's, most trafficked downtown commercial corridors that unfortunately, when you walk through them, you feel like you're more in a abandoned middle America town than you do a thriving metropolitan area. And we'd all like to see that enlivened activity come back to our key commercial corridors, especially in major hubs around tourism, events, and where there's major population centers. So I know I still like walking into a physical store for a lot of things and looking at it. I'm not that old, but I don't like to buy everything online. So, and through this whole process, you still didn't bring up environmental concerns, which we'll leave that to another podcast. But it's an ongoing thing. I think the good news for many of your members is they've got their own decarbonization goals and they're really looking at how to meet them. But for some of them that have their own very aggressive goals, even some of the regulations unattainable. So we'll save that one for another day, but because we've covered a lot. But anything
we've covered
else?
The waterfront.
What's that?
So we've covered the waterfront.
We've covered the waterfront, exactly.
But Weston, to your point on sustainability, I mean, obviously it's a huge issue for my members. A lot of them do have very aggressive sustainability plans, but again, we've got to make sure that whatever rules and regulations are put out are actually achievable and can be met and can be done in a way that isn't overly burdensome or overly costly and actually meets what the stated goal is going to be. And I think there are concerns that some of what's coming out of California and others doesn't achieve that. So we've got to make sure we've got a true partnership to achieve some of these laudable goals.
I couldn't agree with you more, right? It's about how we get to the future.
Yep.
And I think that's where everybody's lining up for the most part, reasonably. Anybody who thinks they're going to be in this industry moving forward, saying, okay, how do we meet these carbon goals? What technology is available? Is the infrastructure there to support us? As the public policy caught up, right? You can't have an issue where a guy has a electric truck and he gets an overweight ticket with an empty container because the battery's sitting over a drive axle. And so now they're in violation of California bridge law. Well, then you don't have a compliant electric truck in that scenario. And that's solved by the stroke of a pen, right? That's not a
Hmm.
big lift. So I think we're, believe it or not, as far as we've come in the last 10 years on sustainability, I still think we're in the nascent phases of it. And I think moving forward, you're going to see, I hope, more of a look at how and less of a look at what we're going to do. It's how are we going to get there? But I feel like you're starting to see a little bit of a shift, even from some of the environmental agencies, on saying, okay, how do we make some of this work? Which remains to be seen. But I feel stronger today than I did a couple of years ago on what the paths forward look like. And hopefully our governmental leaders force the appropriate agencies that have a stake in the game to all work together, not just the air quality regulators, but also the Department of Transportations that need to look at their policies, the Department of Energies, whatever they're called in different states, to take a look at what their infrastructure looks like and what their grid looks like, and do they have the resiliency to support this? These are all different things that I'm hoping, usually they all report to a governor's office or some sort of single entity that can bring them together. And that convening is necessary now if we want to hit those goals in the 2035s and the 2050s of the world. Now is when that heavy lifting needs to be done. But John, any final words for our viewers or our listeners?
No, just thank you. Always appreciate the opportunity, and thank you to all of your members and listeners, and for the partnership that you all have with my members. And thank you for continuing to go out and support my members. Go out and continue shopping. We always appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thank you for joining us again. I can say here at Cargomatic, we take great pride in being a customer-centric company. Obviously, we have partnerships with some of the largest retailers in the US, and it's all about how do we do things faster, better, more efficiently, and more cost effectively, because at the end of the day, it's the consumer and the general American public that benefits from all of those capabilities. And so appreciate everything the NRF's doing, appreciate all of your work. I mean, you continue to get recognized as a major influencer of public policy on behalf of the NRF in Washington, D.C., and being able to spread that out, as you said, with folks like the California Retail Association and others. So this isn't just one big, federal issue, but people understand how this hits them on Main Street from the state level down to the local levels, and working with chambers of commerce. I think that's all going to be important moving forward. So, John, as always, thank you for joining us. John Gold with the National Retail Federation, one of our favorite and most frequent guests. Signing off, I'm Weston LeBar. This has been another episode of People on the Move, a Cargomatic podcast. Until next time.